Clint Eastwood played him in 3 films. The last one came out in 1966. In 60 years, no one has played him since. Not a reboot, not a reinvention, not one performance that's come close. Why? The first clue doesn't come from a critic or a fan theory. It comes from the man who made him. Decades later, Sergio Leone said something strange about the very trilogy that built Blondie's legend. My films are basically silent films. The dialogue just adds some weight. A director calling his own most famous work silent isn't modesty. It's a confession, and not the one you'd expect. Not the poncho, not the cigar, not the squint. Figure out what Leone was actually admitting, and you'll understand something nobody else has explained. Blondie wasn't just difficult to replace. He was impossible. Rewind to 1964. Clint Eastwood wasn't a star yet. He was riding drag on a TV cattle drive, third build on a show called Rawhide, playing a character nobody remembers today. Sergio Leone had directed exactly 1 film before this, a sword and sandal picture nobody remembers either. 2 men, both a half step from irrelevant, about to make the most influential westerns of the decade. Neither man had a reason to expect what was coming. The budget was so small that failure wouldn't have hurt either of them. Eastwood said it himself later, if the movie flopped, nobody back home would even hear about it. That's not the mindset of someone building a legend. That's the mindset of someone with nothing to lose. So he started cutting his own lines. Scene after scene, Eastwood trimmed his own dialogue down, not polishing it, removing it. He's credited, alongside the film's dialogue writer, with stripping the script further than what he was handed. A decision made on purpose by the one man standing in front of the camera. That wasn't the strangest silence in the film, though. The strangest one wasn't a choice at all. 30 years later, someone finally asked Eastwood about the squint, the one every gunslinger since has tried to copy. He didn't describe a character choice, he described bad lighting. They bombed me with a bunch of lights, and you're outside and it's 90 degrees. It's hard not to squint. No menace behind it, no calculation, just sunlight. One piece of his silence was engineered on purpose. The other was an accident of Spanish weather. 2 completely different origins, and on screen, they read as the exact same thing. A man giving away nothing. That shouldn't hold together for 2.5 hours, 3 separate times. It does anyway. Something bigger held them both together. Something that could turn a decision and an accident into the exact same effect. And once you go looking for what that something is, the one fact everybody already knows about this character, the thing that gave him his entire legend, starts to come apart in your hands. It isn't even true. And if his name wasn't real, what else about Blondie wasn't? Say his name. Go ahead. Most people say the same thing. The man with no name. It's on the posters. It's in film textbooks. It's the answer on Tribunite. A hero too mysterious to even have a name. Now, go back and watch the films. In A Fistful of Dollars, the coffin maker calls him Joe. In For a Few Dollars More, he's Manco. In The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Tuco calls him Blondie. 3 films, 3 names. The man with no name is never said, not once in any of them. A marketing department invented it for his American release in 1967. Credited to United Artists and, according to film historian Christopher Frayling, to Eastwood himself. In Europe, where the trilogy premiered first, he was only ever Joe. The single most famous thing about this character wasn't written by Leone. It was written by an ad campaign years after the camera stopped rolling, sold to audiences as the truth about a man who'd actually been given a name in every film he ever appeared in. The legend was built after the fact, so it turns out was the story. A Fistful of Dollars wasn't just influenced by another film. It basically was another film, a Mexican border town standing in for a Japanese one. 3 years earlier, Akira Kurosawa released Yojimbo. A lone swordsman walks into a town split between 2 gangs, plays them against each other, profits from the wreckage. Watch both films back to back, and it's not homage, it's the same architecture, scene for scene in places. The rival gangs, the coffin maker who profits from the war, the stranger playing both sides for money and walking away with everyone's cash. Leone never asked permission. Somewhere in Tokyo, Kurosawa sat down to watch an unfamiliar Western and realized, scene by scene, that he already knew this film. He reportedly wrote to Leone directly, and the line has survived for 60 years exactly as it was reported. Signor Leone, I have just had the chance to see your film. It is a very fine film, but it is my film. Toho, the studio behind Yojimbo, sued. The case settled out of court. Kurosawa and Toho are said to have walked away with around 15% of the film's earnings, more than Yojimbo itself ever made. A settlement, not a compliment. The plot wasn't original. Neither was the premise. Even the ending, by most honest accounts, was borrowed. And yet, in 60 years, no one's ever sued the next person for stealing Blondie. 60 years of imitators and not one lawsuit. Because nobody has stolen him well enough to get caught. Whatever made this character work, it was never the story on the page. So if it isn't the plot, and we already know it isn't the dialogue, the real answer isn't hiding in what was written at all. It's hiding in how the film was actually made.
Dust in the air, a dozen accents overlapping, nobody entirely sure what the person across from them just said. Actors from 4 different countries, all in the same scene, all talking at once, and not one of them speaking the same language. An Italian answering a Spaniard in Italian, a German answering back in German. Eastwood, the one American on set, delivering his lines in English to people who couldn't understand a word of it. Nobody on that set could actually follow the scene as dialogue. Not the actors, not each other, none of it was even being recorded as real sound. That was normal for a production like this. Every word, every footstep, every gunshot got added months later, in a studio far from that desert. What Eastwood said out loud while the camera rolled wasn't the movie's real dialogue. It was a placeholder, a guide track for a voice that would eventually replace his own. He'd even get called back into a studio later to redub his own lines for the English language release. The voice in the finished film isn't quite the same performance anyone standing on that dusty set actually heard. The words that day barely mattered. Something was carrying the scene instead. Before a single frame was filmed, Ennio Morricone had already finished the score. Leone would describe a character to him, and Morricone would hand back 4 or 5 different musical ideas for that one person, themes built in Leone's own words to clothe the character the way dialogue normally would. Then, on location, Leone did something almost no director does. He played that finished score out loud on set through speakers while the cameras rolled. The actors weren't performing against a script, they were performing against music that already existed. The information a scene needs to work, who to trust, when danger's arriving, what a silence means, wasn't coming from anything anyone said. It was coming from a melody written weeks earlier for a scene that hadn't even been shot yet. The dialogue was never carrying this movie. The music was. That's also why the camera stayed so close on his face for so long. When the words don't matter and the music already knows the ending, the only place left to look for information is the eyes. No one on set was really listening to anyone. The words were placeholders. The music was already finished. The only thing actually happening in front of the lens was a man's face and the sun. Everything else in the frame was manufactured somewhere else, by somebody else, weeks or months away. If this was never a style choice, but a specific physical way of building a film, could someone just decide to rebuild it today?
Walk into a studio in 2026 and pitch it. A stranger writes into town. No name that matters, no backstory, no arc. He solves a problem, takes the money, rides out, and the film never explains why he did any of it. Somewhere in that meeting, someone asked the question that ends it. What do we build the sequel around? There's no answer. That's the whole point of the character. That's exactly the problem. 60 years ago, nobody needed that sentence. Just a stranger, a horse, and a deadline nobody remembers. 9 of the top 10 highest-grossing films in America last year were sequels. Not one original story cracked the top 15. A Fistful of Dollars cost around $200,000 to make. A modern tentpole now averages over $200 million, roughly 1,000 times the budget for roughly the same 2 hours on screen. You'd expect the excuse to be that nobody wants westerns anymore, except that's not true. 7 of the top 10 highest-grossing westerns in history came out in roughly the last decade. Audiences still show up. So the problem was never the western. It's narrower than that. Swap the writer's room for the marketing meeting and the real problem shows up. A poster needs a tagline. A press kit needs a one-sentence bio. Someone has to explain in a few words who this man is and why anyone should care, because that sentence is what sells the opening weekend. Neither has ever been written for a man who says almost nothing at all. A $200 million hero can't be built the way Blondie was built. Blondie was designed to reveal nothing. Modern blockbusters are designed to expand forever. One is a film, the other is a franchise wearing a film as its first installment, and a franchise needs a character people can still be talking about in the sixth movie. Except, there's a twist buried inside all of it. Blondie only ever gave the audience one honest sentence about himself, and he said it out loud. When a man's got money in his pocket, he begins to appreciate peace. A mercenary, unapologetically. It's going to matter more than it sounds like right now, because money killed this character everywhere else in the industry, and one man had already built him once, with nothing to lose. Decades later, that same man had everything. Money, control, his own name above the title. Did he ever try to bring him back? He had every reason to try. 9 years after The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Eastwood picked up a camera himself. Total control. No producer standing between him and the choice this time. High Plains Drifter, 1973. A stranger rides into another town. Same silence, on the surface, but the film keeps hinting he might be a ghost. A dead man back to settle a score. With a grudge the story slowly reveals. An explanation. The one thing Blondie never had. 3 years later, the outlaw Josie Wales, a farmer whose family is murdered, who becomes an outlaw for a reason the film maps out in full, and says more about that reason than Blondie said across 3 entire movies combined. By 1985's Pale Rider, the no-name device is technically still there, but everything around it is warmer, talkier, more explained than anything in the original trilogy. Line them up and the pattern is unmistakable. The silences get shorter every time. The explanations get longer every time. Eastwood wasn't rebuilding Blondie. He was slowly explaining him out of existence one movie at a time. Every single time he returned to this archetype with total creative freedom, he added something back. A ghost, a grievance, a reason. Not once, across 5 decades and every chance in the world, did he rebuild the original condition. A man the audience is told absolutely nothing about. Maybe he didn't want to repeat himself. Maybe audiences needed more by then. Whatever the reason, patience for that much silence had worn thin, even for the one man who'd played it best. It doesn't actually matter which. Either way, the one person on Earth with the motive, the money, and the authority to prove this was repeatable never did it. 50 years of chances, one condition never rebuilt. It was never a technique sitting in a drawer waiting to be used again. It was something that happened exactly once. Go back to where this started. Leone. My films are basically silent films. The dialogue just adds some weight. That's the confession. Not a philosophy handed down on purpose. An accident of economics, no synced sound, a script cut down by choice, a squint caused by nothing more than the sun, captured once by a production too cheap and too rushed to know better. That production doesn't exist anymore. Not because nobody wants it, because the industry got better at making money, and in getting better, it optimized silence and mystery and unexplained men completely out of the system. That's not a tragedy, that's success. It isn't that nobody today is talented enough to build another Blondie. It's that the entire system now runs on the one thing Blondie never had to offer, an explanation. You cannot merchandise a man who says everything he'll ever say in 11 lines. Blondie only ever told us one true thing about himself, in his own words. When a man's got money in his pocket, he begins to appreciate peace. He wasn't noble. He said out loud that money was the only honest motive left in a violent world. Not a flaw, the whole character. Now look at what replaced him. Return on investment, intellectual property, risk management. 9 of the top 10 movies in America last year, sequels, every one of them, running on exactly the philosophy Blondie said out loud in 1964. Hollywood didn't reject Blondie's worldview. It adopted it, and in finally becoming the world Blondie always believed already existed, it optimized away the one kind of man who could survive there without ever explaining himself. Next time someone tells you Hollywood ran out of talent, tell them what actually happened. It ran out of the one thing money can't buy back. An accident nobody was trying to have on a movie nobody expected to matter. Changing tastes didn't erase him. Success did. A silent man, an industry that finally agrees with him about everything, except the silence. There's another performer who pulled off this same impossible trick once, in a completely different genre, and just like Eastwood, never managed to repeat it either. That's next. If you want it the moment it's up, that's what the subscribe button is actually for.